Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to the wisdom warrior Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. The supreme and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta. Now let's continue with the Platform Sutra. We have finished chapter 4. Today we begin chapter 5, the chapter on meditation. Of course, there is much more of the Platform Sutra ahead. Sometimes I will explain in more detail and sometimes more briefly. We can also simply go through the text directly. Many of you here probably enjoy seated meditation and practicing Chan. Nowadays, it is not only Buddhists but also people of other religions and even non-Buddhists who practice Chan meditation. This is to say, Chan culture has become one of the most popular and beloved fields of study in modern society. Therefore, as Buddhists, it is very necessary for us to understand the various aspects of Chan Buddhism. Moreover, Chan culture has now entered every field of society. Especially in universities in Western countries, both teachers and students are particularly fond of it. The reason they like it is that through practicing meditation, much stress can be relieved. It is very helpful in eliminating mental restlessness, anxiety, suffering, and disturbances. Furthermore, for physical health, eliminating illnesses such as high blood pressure and insomnia, practicing meditation is very useful. So, Dharma friends, it is important to develop the habit of regularly practicing meditation. If you have some pith instructions from Chan or the Supreme Tantras, that is of course excellent. Even if you don't have many pith instructions, just like what is popular in the Han region now, simply sitting cross-legged in the lotus position and meditating for a while is also very beneficial for your body and mind. Of course, regarding your sitting posture, according to the relevant sutras and treatises, the best is the full lotus position. Many of our Dharma friends can probably do this. Some people emphasize that it is not necessary at all, but actually it is not that it is unnecessary. If you can sit in this way, it is very important. Because according to the scriptures, there is a difference between the half lotus and full lotus positions. If you sit in half lotus, your body cannot be fully upright. If the body is not upright, the inner channels cannot be straight. If the channels are not straight, the energy cannot flow straight. If the energy is not straight, the circulating wisdom and so forth cannot properly manifest various states. The Vajra posture, the full lotus position, has some unique capabilities. This is why when the Buddha attained enlightenment, many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas used this posture. There are very special reasons for this, so we cannot completely deny its importance. To say it doesn't matter and you can sit however you like, or that standing or sitting are the same. Some people who don't understand just speak carelessly because they have never known these benefits and have never practiced sitting meditation themselves. Speaking carelessly like this is not reasonable. But we also cannot focus entirely on just discussing the sitting posture every day while neglecting all other practices such as recitation, study, and contemplation. Such an approach is also not reasonable. Regardless, today we are here to discuss the Sixth Patriarch as a Chan master, the sixth great Chan Patriarch's oral transmission and his meditation philosophy, and what kind of wisdom treasure he left for future generations. Let us study this together. The master instructed the assembly. In this school, seated meditation fundamentally does not focus on the mind, nor does it focus on purity, nor is it about being motionless. The Sixth Patriarch spoke thus to his disciples. He said, "My approach to the Dharma is what is known as the sudden path. There is a supremely profound practice through which I attained awakening myself. It is called the Chan approach, the practice of seated meditation. The practice of seated meditation has many pith instructions. To summarize them here, fundamentally do not cling to the mind, nor cling to purity. Some versions say do not observe the mind, but cling to is probably more appropriate. Originally, do not cling to the mind. Unlike the mind-only school and certain other schools that place great emphasis solely on the mind, this is ultimately not the approach here, nor should one cling to the notion that the mind is originally pure. Such attachment to purity is also not present here. It is also not about being motionless. Nowadays, some in Chan Buddhism think that as long as you don't move, that's good. That non-movement is meditation. Actually, it is not the case that non-movement alone constitutes meditation. In fact, when one's meditative state reaches a higher level, walking, standing, sitting, lying down, everything can be a display of meditation. In all activities of walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, one can maintain one's state through the meditative experience. Therefore, it is not just about being motionless. This was a brief introduction. Below these 3 points, not focusing on the mind, not focusing on purity, and not being about motionlessness, will be explained in detail. If one speaks of clinging to the mind is originally delusion. Knowing the mind is like an illusion, therefore there is nothing to focus on. First, one should not focus on the mind. If some people think they should focus on the mind and cling to this mind of theirs, your mind is originally empty and luminous. Luminosity and emptiness are inseparable. If one focuses on the mind in this way, it is unreasonable. Why is it unreasonable? Because according to the Madhyamaka view, the mind itself is free from the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. According to the Tantric explanation, it is inconceivable, inexpressible, and beyond words and thoughts. It can be said to be a state of equal purity and non-duality. This is the nature of the mind. Our current belief that the mind exists is a delusion. Knowing that this mind is like an illusion, the mind itself is like a dream, like magic. Its essence also does not exist. What use is clinging to it? There is none. It is merely an appearance in the conventional realm. What is there to cling to? Therefore, there is nothing to cling to. This is very well said. In the ultimate view, there is not even clinging to the mind. The Prajnaparamita Sutra also says, there is no inherent mind. The nature of mind is luminous. This luminosity is not the bright and clear thing we imagine in our minds. It refers to the great luminosity. The so-called great luminosity is explained in the Tantras. Therefore, there is nothing about the mind to cling to. Inside and out, the mind is empty. The Avatamsaka Sutra also says, Bodhisattvas observe that the mind is not outside, nor can it be found inside. They know the nature of mind is non-existent. Knowing the nature of this mind, the mind is utterly ungraspable. Therefore, focusing on the mind in this way is unreasonable. When the Sixth Patriarch speaks of this here, everyone should understand. The second point, if one speaks of focusing on purity, human nature is originally pure. Due to deluded thoughts, true suchness is covered. If there are no delusions, the nature is naturally pure. If the mind arises and focuses on purity, it gives rise to the delusion of purity. Delusion has no location. The one who focuses is deluded. The second point, if you think the nature of the mind is pure, or that the external world is pure, this is also not correct. Thinking that human nature is originally pure is itself a discriminating delusion. Because at the ultimate level of essence, both purity and impurity are completely negated and do not exist. Therefore, such deluded clinging to purity will certainly obscure the true original face of suchness. As long as you have no delusions whatsoever, as long as you realize and understand without any delusion, discrimination, attachment, or falsity, at that point, the inherent purity will naturally manifest. So if the mind clings to purity, this is called the delusion of purity. Yesterday, in the Ornament of Clear Realization, we also discussed that if one has attachment to the 3 paths, the path of meditation, the path of seeing, and the path of no more learning, this is also discrimination toward pure objects of apprehension. Earlier, we said such discriminating thoughts must be abandoned, as well as discrimination toward impure objects of apprehension. Aren't there 9 types of each? This is explained exactly the same way here. At the ultimate level, such attachment to purity is also unreasonable. Although when we teach Tantra, there is an intermediate stage determined by the measure of pure vision. For example, Sukhavati is pure, and the eastern Pure Land of Lapis Lazuli is also pure. Temporarily there is such a view. But ultimately, the measure of pure vision is after all a conventional truth measure. In the end, what is determined by the measure of pure vision is merely a conventional phenomenon appearing before pure bodhisattvas. In reality, its essence is not established as pure in any way. If it were, we could not say that Sukhavati is one's own mind, that the essence of mind is free from the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. We would not say that. So there are many profound points here. These profound points can only be understood through long-term study and contemplation. Ultimately, even the delusion of purity has no basis. Therefore, the one who focuses is also deluded. Whether you cling to purity or cling to impurity, any clinging to anything is unreasonable at the ultimate level. Why is this so at the ultimate level? Perhaps some who have never studied might think that purity should be established. All phenomena are originally pure. This is merely a temporary designation. In reality, what is called pure also does not exist at the ultimate level. Those who have previously studied Tantra should understand this point. Purity has no form, yet one establishes a notion of purity and saying this is spiritual practice. Those who hold this view obstruct their own original nature and become bound by purity. Purity has no form, whether it is the purity of the Buddha, the purity of Buddha fields, or the pure appearance in our minds. When truly examined, there is no real form. Purity cannot be grasped. If one establishes a form of purity and says this is spiritual practice, then seeing the mind in this way actually creates an obstruction to the original nature. At the truly ultimate level, nothing pure permanently exists. It can never exist permanently. This is called the bondage of purity. The treasury of the Dharmadhatu among the 7 treasuries also states that any attachment, whether good attachment or bad attachment, is bondage. Just as when binding something, whether with ordinary rope or a golden chain, though the golden chain is precious, if it binds you, it is still bondage. The same is true of ordinary ropes made of yak hair. His Holiness, Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, in the Doha he sang when receiving the Kilaya teachings in Nepal, said that golden chains and ordinary iron chains and ropes are equally causes of bondage. There is such a line. The meaning is that at the ultimate level, any attachment to purity or impurity is entirely bondage. So if you think this is purity, including when we say Tathagatagarba is pure or that Dzogchen's primordial purity, if at the truly ultimate level, in the wisdom of meditative equipoise, there were such characteristics, this would also be unreasonable. So we often say that in determining emptiness, including the true face of the essence of Tathagatagarbha, not even a sesame seed's worth of substantially real pure or impure phenomena can exist in essence. Nothing substantially real exists. Everyone should be clear about this. We just discussed that attachment to the mind is unreasonable, and attachment to purity is also unreasonable. Next, how should we understand so-called non-movement? Good friends, if one cultivates non-movement, when seeing all people, not seeing their right and wrong, good and evil, faults and shortcomings, this is the non-movement of self-nature. Here the 6th Patriarch said to the good friends, if you cultivate non-movement, immovable thusness, the non-movement of your meditative state and so forth, when seeing all people in all circumstances and all situations, not seeing others right or wrong, good or evil, faults or merits, not seeing any of this, this is called the non-movement of self-nature. True non-movement of self-nature should be like this. It is not about abiding in a state of goodness, nor is it about abiding in a particularly bright and clear state. Many practitioners today, because their foundation in study and contemplation is insufficient, find practice very difficult, to be honest. It seems that when not practicing, everything seems practicable, but when actually practicing, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. On this point, if one has the pith instructions of Tibetan Buddhism, it should be much easier. I have always believed that certain practices of Tibetan Buddhism, not to boast about my own tradition, but indeed at which stages one needs to focus on luminosity, at which stages on emptiness, and at which stages one should not focus on anything at all, like the 4 stages of the Madhyamaka view, such analysis makes practice more convenient. Otherwise, practice is not about meditating on whatever you want. Here, so-called non-movement actually means that when seeing all good and bad things, the mind does not waver and does not cling to them. Not clinging to good or evil, this is called non-movement. Good friends, Deluded people, though their bodies do not move, open their mouths and immediately speak of others' right and wrong, strengths and weaknesses, good and bad. This is contrary to the way. If one focuses on the mind or on purity, this obstructs the way. He said, "Good friends, deluded people without wisdom in the course of their practice, though their bodies remain completely still and their eyes half closed." I recall seeing someone practicing seated meditation. I won't say more. It was in the past. If I say more, he would know I'm talking about him and would be unhappy. Though the body does not move, the mouth speaks of, "You may be still when in meditative equipoise, but when emerging from meditation you speak of others' strengths and weaknesses, right and wrong, good and bad, and so forth." This is actually contrary to the true path. If you are truly non-moving, whether in or out of meditative equipoise in any situation, there would be no attachment to good or bad, strengths or weaknesses. If you are particularly obvious in this regard, it shows that your level of practice has not yet reached the state of non-movement. Some of us may think that so-called non-movement means simply remaining still when we sit in meditation. When not meditating, I can freely lose my temper and say whatever I want. Some people, when meditating, are very compassionate, but during meditation, if someone slightly knocks on the door, they say, "Hey, you can't do that. I'm meditating. What are you doing? I want to practice." True immovable thusness. I was in immovable thusness. How could you disturb me? This is probably not true immovable thusness. True immovable thusness means in Chan Buddhism, and among many great masters with high levels of realization, in every corner of life and in every situation, they see all of conventional reality as like a dream, like an illusion. In appearance, it is like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, a shadow. They do not cling to it, nor do they particularly accept or reject it. When in meditative equipoise, even such mere appearances are not present. The highest level of Chan Buddhism is like this. But for many of us, of course, practice is helpful. Indeed, practice is helpful. But can this practice become a tool for counteracting afflictions? This is also very important. Otherwise, for some people, the more they practice, the worse their mood becomes and the more irritable their temperament. This is not good. I mentioned some time ago that as practitioners, not to mention being like the great masters of ancient times who had miraculous powers, could fly anywhere, and could read others' minds. If you cannot manifest these superior qualities for now, at least your mental state should be somewhat different from ordinary worldly people. Because worldly people, even over trivial matters, can fly into a rage or even become so attached that they commit suicide. Nowadays, when we investigate the reasons behind many suicides, they turn out to be very simple. Indeed, for us ordinary people with kind hearts, such things are simply not worth it. But as practitioners of Chan or Tantra, at least our hearts should have some nourishment. Compared to our mental state before we began practicing, we should be better now. Compared to someone who has never practiced, our temperament should be better. This point is very important. Otherwise, indeed, including myself, sometimes when seeing practitioners, one won't develop wrong views toward the Dharma, but toward certain people there is still some, as Longchenpa said, a sense of disappointment. Why? This person has practiced for such a long time, yet when someone nearby says a few words, they become so angry, so pained. From their expressions and words, sometimes, of course this is not the majority, only a very few, sometimes over small matters, even in some monastic communities, there can be inappropriate behavior. Of course, as I said earlier, not everyone who has ordained has truly renounced worldly attachments in their mind. We should not develop strong wrong views toward monastics. Originally, having this spirit of renunciation, including wearing the robes of Shakyamuni Buddha, has immeasurable merit. From this perspective, we should rejoice in all monastics, but on the other hand, sometimes some monastics practice particularly poorly. One wonders why they became a monastic, whether they truly had renunciation or did so for some other reason. Such phenomena also exist. Through practice, everyone's mind should become gentle and tamed. This is very important. Otherwise, if your body merely sits still in immovable for a while, and after finishing meditation, you argue with this person and criticize that one with your mind particularly agitated, this is not called immovable. True non-movement means that toward all worldly things, just as stated in the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, one has attained a certain level of realization. If one focuses on the mind or on purity, this obstructs the way. If you are particularly attached to the mind, if you are particularly attached to purity, or even if we are extremely attached to any worldly phenomenon, this will certainly obstruct your path. If even attachment to pure phenomena is an obstruction, how much more so attachment to impure phenomena? If we are particularly attached to impure people and things, this will certainly obstruct your aspiration for the path and your cultivation. Therefore, in Buddhism, especially when discussing Chan, when the mind abides, we are still required to let go of some things. These attachments bring us much suffering in this life and future lives. Actually, when we analyze, the suffering of people today is of two kinds. One is the ripening of results from previous causes. The other kind is suffering produced by clinging to any object in the present moment. For example, if one killed beings in previous lives, in this life the body may constantly be in pain, or the mind may be disturbed and agitated. Such situations exist. This may be very difficult for me to deal with immediately, because this result has already ripened and is hard to counteract. The other kind is caused by extreme attachment to people and things. This kind of suffering, when we truly find the antidote through practice and find its root, is easy to counteract. So in our daily practice, observing the mind is indeed very important for everyone. The suffering brought by causes from previous lives may not be easily seen through immediately. If we discover the secret of the mind, even if our body is in a very bad environment, everything before us can become a condition for happiness. We can say this. The Master instructed the assembly, "Good friends, what is called meditation? In this Dharma path, there are no obstructions or hindrances. Externally, regarding all good and evil states, when thoughts do not arise, this is called sitting. Internally, seeing that the self-nature does not move, this is called Chan." The Sixth Patriarch explains seated meditation. Regarding seated meditation, it seems that ordinarily everyone thinks that seated means to sit down and Chan means to abide without thinking of anything. This is called seated meditation. Don't disturb me, I'm about to do seated meditation. The Sixth Patriarch said, "Good friends, what is called seated meditation?" Of course, in other Dharma gates, there are different explanations. In the Hinayana, in Tantra, and in other schools, there are different analyses of seated meditation. But in my Dharma gate of sudden teaching, there are no obstructions or hindrances. Externally regarding all good and evil states, thoughts do not arise. Toward all that is good or evil there is nothing whatsoever, because when the mind abides, whether toward good or evil, toward good or bad, toward eternalism or nihilism, there is nothing regarding any phenomenon. It is not about blocking, keeping shut, always enduring hardship, gathering all discursive thoughts and blocking them. It is not like that. There is no obstruction, no hindrance, nothing blocking. Regarding all phenomena, the mind does not give rise to thoughts, does not chase after them, and does not cling to them. In Dzogchen as well we often say, do not seek the future, do not recall the past, and do not cling to the present. When appearances arise, abide in the state of that appearance. In this way, discursive thoughts naturally liberate. In Tantra, there is often self-liberation, a particularly supreme Dharma gate. Self-liberation is actually very important. When you use your own mind to observe your own mind, no matter what it is like, it naturally liberates. This is illustrated by the analogy of the snake's body, the snake knot. Here it is also explained this way, not giving rise to discursive thoughts toward all good and evil. This is called sitting. Here, sitting actually means not giving rise to discursive thoughts, not toward good, not toward evil. Good and evil do appear. Therefore, in Tantra we say, appearances are not refuted, attachment is refuted. Appearances of good exist, appearances of evil also exist. The appearance of birdsong exists, the sound of a child crying nearby also exists. This local person who doesn't quite understand, chanting the Avalokiteshvara mantra, that sound also exists. All phenomena exist, but you do not deliberately cling to them or accept and reject them. This is called sitting. What is Chan? Internally seeing that the self-nature does not move. Clearly this appearance exists, but the essence of this appearance has been completely and thoroughly seen. This is what we call shamatha and vipassana. The first is shamatha, the latter is vipassana. So-called vipassana is using wisdom to recognize its nature. When the mind has no attachment, this is called shamatha. But it is not just about having no attachment. If merely having no attachment were a realization, a stone also has no attachment. A newborn baby also does not have the same kind of attachment as an adult. In our world, beings in the formless realm also have no attachment. There are many instances of non-attachment that are not necessarily a realization, but simultaneously with non-attachment, one has recognized its nature. This recognition is not determined through discursive thought. It may be difficult to express in words, but in reality, the true original face of the mind, whether you discriminate or not, is the non-duality of shamatha and vipassana. Mipham Rinpoche's directly pointing out the nature of mind contains particularly profound pith instructions. His Holiness also attained awakening through the non-duality of natural meditation and the self-knowing, self-aware mind. He attained immediate awakening at that moment. His Holiness spoke of this pith instruction in various teachings, and this is why it is so exceptionally supreme. So I feel that when the Sixth Patriarch explains Chan practice, he also gives us very profound instructions. What is called seated meditation? Seated meditation is like this. A mind free from discrimination is what is meant by sitting. Chan means recognizing one's own true nature. Being able to see that the self-nature has nothing that can be moved, nothing that can be obtained. This is true Chan. To understand this discernment requires a kind of awakening. If you have no awakening and merely lack attachment without seeing, therefore the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment also says, if with a mind of samsara one thinks and ponders, one merely revolves, one only reaches the boundary of samsara and cannot enter the ocean of Buddhahood. If one uses a discriminating mind to cling, then one is in a state of samsara and cannot enter the ocean of the Buddha's realm. For this reason, we need awakening at all times and in all places. This awakening requires the guidance of a spiritual teacher, and at the same time, one must frequently observe one's own mind. We can only talk about it, but actually observing the mind is quite difficult. However, relying on inner observation, the recognition of the mind, according to the teachings of the lineage masters, is actually not very difficult, because everyone, His Holiness also said this when he taught us Dzogchen in the past, no matter how dull you may be, when your own mind observes your own mind, not understanding what its state is like, this is impossible. So on this point, as long as you have some interest and some confidence in yourself, when you use the mind to observe the mind you are observing, what is it like? When thoughts are arising and moving, does the essence of those thoughts exist or not? It does not exist. In essence, it has always been immovable thusness. Seeing this point is not difficult at all. This is called realizing the nature of mind. It is also explained this way. This is called Chan practice. Good friends, what is called dhyana samadhi? Externally being free from characteristics is dhyana, internally not being disturbed is samadhi. Externally all characteristics, existence, non-existence, pure, impure, all are absent. This is called dhyana. Internally the inner wisdom is not scattered. One completely penetrates its true meaning. This corresponds to the grasped and the grasper. The grasped is being free from characteristics. As we discussed yesterday regarding objects of focus and so forth, there are no objects of focus. Internally not disturbed, the inner mind not disturbed, the mind not clinging, means the grasper has no attachment. Just as we discuss the aspects and objects of focus on the path of preparation, in Chan Buddhism here it is actually the same. Combining the ornament of clear realization with the platform sutra, they explain each other very well. If one doesn't understand the ornament of clear realization, one won't understand the platform sutra. If one doesn't understand the platform sutra, it is also difficult to explain the ornament of clear realization, right? Externally, if one clings to characteristics, the inner mind becomes disturbed. Externally, if one is free from characteristics, the mind is not disturbed. The original nature is naturally pure and naturally settled. Only by seeing states and thinking about states does one become disturbed. If one sees all states, yet the mind is not disturbed, this is true samadhi. What is true dhyana samadhi? True dhyana samadhi is like this. If we cling to external mountains, rivers, the great earth and everything, then the inner mind will certainly be scattered and confused. When there is attachment to the grasped, then the grasper cannot possibly awaken. There can be no state of realization. If one is free from the external grasped characteristics, then the inner mind will not be disturbed. Therefore, we first determine that all phenomena are emptiness. In Dzogchen, sometimes we observe from the aspect of the grasping mind, and we also examine the grasped objects. Examining both inside and out, in the end, all characteristics are absent. So at this point, I think this is also very important. The meaning is that if the external grasped characteristics are absent, then the grasping mind itself will not be confused. The original nature is naturally pure and naturally settled. The original nature is naturally pure. Natural samadhi and natural wisdom can manifest. Only by seeing states and thinking about states does one become disturbed. If the external objects we see exist, and the consciousness that perceives them also exists, if both the object and the perceiving subject exist, then certainly the mind is confused and there can be no time of realization. This is the so-called samsaric mind. If we see that external objects are non-existent, are pure, then the mind that grasps them will also not be disturbed. This is true dhyana samadhi. We can also explain this using the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, including the Buddha's physical form, which is temporarily established as a pure physical form, the Bodhisattva's practice of skillful means, and Miraculous Transformation Sutra also says, all phenomena are without characteristics. This is realizing emptiness, which is non-existent. In order to guide sentient beings, the body with marks and signs is displayed. Before sentient beings, even the Buddha's body adorned with marks and signs appears. So temporarily, in conventional terms, we accept that the Buddha's body adorned with marks and signs exists. But this merely appears before beings to be guided. In reality, it does not exist. How much less can we say that impure phenomena truly exist in essence? Such a method of determination is also very important. Good friends, externally being free from characteristics is dhyana, internally not being disturbed is samadhi. External dhyana and internal samadhi, this is dhyana samadhi. What is dhyana samadhi? Dhyana samadhi is like this. If external characteristics are absent, this is called dhyana. If external characteristics are absent, the inner attachment will also be absent. The mind will not be scattered. This is called samadhi. In contemporary Dharma terminology, being free from grasped characteristics is called dhyana. Being free from grasping characteristics is called samadhi. When we teach the ornament of clear realization, the 18 types of discrimination toward the grasped are absent. Among the discriminations toward the grasper, if the 18 types of substantial grasper discrimination and imputed grasper discrimination are absent, this is called true dhyana samadhi. Everyone should know this. These are all characteristics, that is to say, external dhyana and internal samadhi. External characteristics being absent is called dhyana. Internal attachment being absent is called samadhi. This is true dhyana samadhi. Dhyana samadhi is explained this way. The Bodhisattva Precepts Sutra says, "My original nature is fundamentally pure. Good friends, in thought after thought, see your own original nature as pure. Cultivate and practice by yourself, and accomplish the Buddha way by yourself." The Sixth Patriarch again cites scriptural authority. Actually, ancient masters of Chinese Buddhism rarely cited scriptural authority, but the Sixth Patriarch often uses one scriptural citation after another. I also checked some original texts. He did not always quote exactly. In the past, Longchenpa had a certain characteristic. He often mixed up the names of sutras or sometimes the content within sutras. Later, many people said this was a characteristic of Longchenpa. It shows that he had memorized so many scriptural citations that sometimes he would mix them up. Some people explain it this way. I think the Sixth Patriarch also probably memorized scriptural citations, but it seems that the several citations he used earlier were approximate. For example, the Bodhisattva Precepts Sutra mentioned here is actually the Brahma Net Sutra, translated by Kumarajiva in ancient times. At the beginning of this sutra, it says, all sentient beings possess Buddha nature, and so forth. Later on, it says, the precept source of all sentient beings is the original nature, which is inherently pure. It seems to be something like this, but here he quotes it as, my original nature is fundamentally pure. So sometimes when we use scriptural citations, it's okay if we make mistakes. Even the Sixth Patriarch, when compared to the original sutra text, the original sutra seems not to have the word my. When you have time, please check it. Perhaps my research is not entirely accurate. The general meaning can be stated as, all sentient beings possess Buddha nature. All sentient beings are originally pure, without any right or wrong. The 400 stanzas on the middle way also says, existence, non-existence, both and neither, all positions are quiescent. There is such a statement. Ultimately, all phenomena are originally pure. There are no characteristics, no right or wrong. Everything is pure. The Sixth Patriarch cites this scriptural authority, so the great masters of Chinese Buddhism should also cite scriptural authorities. Once, a monk debated with me, saying, you Tibetan Buddhists use one scriptural citation after another. These citations are hard to explain. In the future, don't use citations. Just say it directly. At that time, I said, actually, using scriptural citations is very good. Because when we use citations, Longchenpa, at the end of his treasury of the Dharmadhatu, said he used many scriptural citations, combining their contents. Foolish people may not understand them, but the wise will know the sources and that these are not personal fabrications. This is very necessary. At the end, he explained the purpose and reason for citing so many scriptural authorities. So I think the wise also appreciate scriptural citations very much. However, people nowadays may not like scriptural citations very much. When they encounter scriptural citations, they often find them somewhat difficult to explain. Many intellectuals say, don't use citations, just say it directly, just state your own viewpoint directly. Some say this, but whether it's just say it directly or not, regardless, it is probably best to still use some scriptural citations. The great masters of the past used scriptural citations with great ease. As soon as they opened their mouths, they would cite a scriptural authority. His Holiness once mentioned there was a Khenpo called Khenpo Sodargye. At one time, he would use over 20 scriptural citations. It seems his teacher said, in this degenerate age, when so many citations are used together, who can understand them? Don't use citations. Later, he specifically stipulated that citations should not be used. When we look at treatises composed nowadays, the great masters of the past, because they had abundant citations in their minds, would constantly use them at any time. People today perhaps are keeping up with the times. Many people regard scriptural citations. Some truly feel there is no need for them, that as long as one's own viewpoint is reasonable, that's fine. In the past, there was great respect for the traditions and teachings of the previous patriarchs. Now it seems many people don't care what the predecessors said. The key is whether present-day language is useful to you, whether it's useful for eliminating suffering. If it's useful, that's very good. If it's not useful, then even 100 or 200 scriptural citations, I don't care, this is not useful to me. Nowadays, many people have this attitude. Good friends, in thought after thought, see your own original nature as pure. Good friends, in every arising thought, recognize the nature of your own mind. Cultivate and practice by yourself. Begin to cultivate yourself. Begin to practice yourself. In this way, gradually you will accomplish the Buddha way by yourself. This concludes Chapter 5 on Dhyana Samadhi. The discussion on Dhyana Samadhi was not very extensive. At that time, the master saw that people from Guangzhou, Shaozhou, and the four directions, both scholars and commoners, had gathered in the mountains to hear the Dharma. Thereupon he ascended the seat and addressed the assembly. Come, good friends, this matter must arise from within your own nature. Next, we discuss the chapter on repentance. At the beginning, he explains the 5 fragrances of purity, the 5 uncontaminated aggregates in the Abhidharmakosha. This seems to appear in the first chapter. At one time, the 6th Patriarch saw that in the region of Guangzhou and Shaozhou, people from all directions, various kinds of people, common folk and so forth, had gathered in the mountains, presumably in the mountains of Shaozhou, to listen to the Dharma. At this time, everyone requested the 6th Patriarch to ascend the high seat. In Chinese Buddhism, one also ascends the Dharma seat. Some people say, "You sit so high up on the Dharma seat every day. How annoying." Regardless, when transmitting the Buddha's Dharma, it is still good to be seated high. You see here it also says, "Thereupon he ascended the seat." It does not say he descended into an underground cave to transmit the Dharma. Ascending the seat. He should still be higher than the others. Thereupon he ascended the seat and addressed the assembly. Come, good friends. He said, Come, good friends, you have come here this time. This matter refers to the great matter of birth and death, or the matter of attaining Buddhahood. Since you have come here, you have not come for any other purpose. It should be for attainment, for practice. This point can indeed be seen in the teachings of the great masters of the past. This matter must arise from within your own nature. To accomplish the great matter of birth and death, to accomplish practice and Buddhahood, this great matter should begin with recognizing the nature of your own mind. It starts from the mind, from cultivating your own inner mind. It is not that someone else transmits a phrase and just hearing that sound is enough, or that the guru just gives me a blessing and that's sufficient. It is not like that. First, one should rely on the guidance of a spiritual teacher. This cannot be separated from that. Then, in your own mind, you should integrate the teachings of the Guru and the lineage masters with your mind. This is where it begins. At all times, in thought after thought, purify your own mind. Cultivate and practice by yourself. See your own Dharmakaya. See the Buddha of your own mind. Liberate yourself. Discipline yourself. Only then will your coming here not be in vain. He said, at all times, in thought after thought, purify your own mind, tame your own mind, recognize your own mind, cultivate by yourself, practice by yourself, see your own Dharmakaya. Actually, this is very important. In all activities, it is impossible to rely entirely on others. Everyone's conditions and circumstances are different. When you come before a spiritual teacher, you should consciously practice on your own. You yourself must see your own Dharmakaya wisdom. You must see for yourself the true Buddha, the original face of your own mind. After this, you can liberate yourself. You can discipline yourself with the precepts. Ultimately, your coming here will not have been wasted. Only then will your coming here not be in vain. Your coming here has meaning. You have not come in vain, not just for this alone. So sometimes in practice, many Dharma friends, whether in Tibetan areas or Han regions, go to various spiritual teachers and various Dharma centers. For oneself, it is very important to receive the Dharma. After receiving the Dharma, recognizing its importance and then practicing it yourself. This is very important. For example, when you come to a pure Dharma center or a renowned Buddhist academy, of course, like our Buddhist academy here, nowadays there are more and more tourists, more and more people taking photos. Some, when they get up in the morning, carry a long camera lens and keep watching the mandala, wondering when the sun will rise, when the sun will set. From 5 o'clock in the morning, they stand there with a tripod, waiting and waiting. Even after the sun sets in the evening, they're still there waiting. Coming specifically to take photos is also fine. Sunrise and sunset are important too. But most importantly, the mind is also very important. Of course, regarding what true practice really is, the 6th Patriarch is indeed very correct. Each one of us who comes to this world will not stay for very long, whether it's you, me, or anyone else. No one will stay for very long. It's as if we are tourists. Encountering such a Dharma gate is also extremely difficult. I myself often, in the process of contemplation, think, In this life I have truly encountered exceptionally supreme Dharma gates. I am especially grateful to the lineage masters. After encountering them, I also use these Dharma gates to some extent to tame my own mind. Best is to recognize your own mind. Even if you haven't recognized your own mind, every day you should recite some mantras, at least use a prayer wheel, and practice virtuous deeds. Reciting the aspiration prayer of Samantabhadra once to make aspirations, these must never be forgotten. Otherwise, in the past, there were some practitioners I knew who were very devout. For about 2 or 3 years, 5 or 6 years, at the beginning they were very pure, very diligent, but in the end, more and more, like eating sugarcane, it became less and less sweet. Finally, they completely became worldly people. I've heard that now they might not even recite the Avalokiteshvara mantra once in a month. That's how it is. Very terrible, a complete failure, very regrettable to have come here. Since you have come from afar and gathered here together, we all share a karmic connection. Now, each of you may kneel in the barbarian style. First, I will transmit the 5-fold Dharmakaya incense of self-nature. Then I will bestow the formless repentance. The assembly knelt. He said here, since you have come from far away and gathered here, we share together, study the Buddha Dharma together, we have great karmic connection. Below I will transmit to you the 5-fold Dharmakaya incense. Each of you, according to Buddhist protocol, kneel in the Indian manner. Kneel in the Indian manner seems to mean the right knee on the ground, this kind of kneeling posture. You should kneel properly and respectfully. First I will transmit to you the 5-fold Dharmakaya incense, then transmit the formless repentance. Finally, there is a formless repentance verse. He first transmits a pure Dharma teaching, then transmits the formless repentance. At this time, everyone, following the Sixth Patriarch's instructions, knelt there respectfully to listen attentively. At this time, he began to teach this Dharma. Actually, the Platform Sutra can be said to be a record of the entire scenes and experiences of the Sixth Patriarch teaching the Dharma in various places. At that time, because people had great faith in the lineage master, they wrote it down. After it was written down, it later became, if worldly people did not value it, it would just be a record of him going to a place and teaching these people, going to Guangzhou to teach, recording the entire process of his lecture. For later generations, some Dharma texts and teachings are indeed very, I think at that time, perhaps the Sixth Patriarch's audience of 1,000 people. I don't know how many people there were when he went to Guangzhou. Maybe there were very few people because he didn't say 1,000 people. Earlier, he proudly mentioned 1,000 people. Later, when there were fewer people, he omitted this detail, right? We don't know how many people there were. It wasn't stated. At least it was more than 3 people because he always referred to them as the assembly. The master said, first, the incense of discipline. What is the incense of discipline? It is what we call the aggregate of discipline. That is, within one's own mind, there is no wrong, no evil, no jealousy, no greed or anger, no intention to harm. This is called the incense of discipline. The incense of discipline within one's own mind. The way of the Bodhisattva also says that so-called discipline is actually established through the mind. Within the mind, there is no wrong, no faults, that is, nothing unreasonable. No evil, no jealousy, no greed or anger, no robbing or harming. This is called the incense of discipline. What is the incense of samadhi? Second, the incense of samadhi. Seeing all good and evil states, one's own mind is not disturbed. This is called the incense of samadhi. Samadhi means seeing all good and evil states without the mind clinging to them. When explaining discipline and samadhi, he uses the perspective of Chan realization. You see, when explaining discipline, it's like the precept of refraining from evil actions. All greed, anger, and ignorance are absent. This is called the incense of discipline. Then, not clinging to the characteristics of good and evil, this is called the incense of samadhi. What is the incense of wisdom? Third, the incense of wisdom. One's own mind is without obstruction, constantly using wisdom. Although practicing all good deeds, the mind does not cling to them. Respecting superiors, mindful of those below, caring for the orphaned and poor, this is called the incense of wisdom. The mind is without obstruction, constantly using wisdom to observe one's own mind, not creating negative karma, and although practicing virtuous deeds, not clinging to them, respecting those above, being mindful of those below, also constantly caring for the elderly without family and the poor, doing charity work. The Sixth Patriarch sometimes speaks at a very high level, no attachment whatsoever. Now he starts talking about doing charity work. So this incense of wisdom is something we can also accomplish, constantly using wisdom to observe yourself, not creating negative karma, and practicing virtuous deeds without clinging to them. I have been using his highest perspective to help explain earlier. Now that it suddenly comes like this, I find it a bit hard to explain too. Let's just go with the flow, let it be. It's fine. This is not the chapter on prajna. When we come to the chapter on prajna, we will use some. In the chapter on repentance, this approach is acceptable. Fourth, the incense of liberation. One's own mind has nothing to cling to, does not think of good, does not think of evil, free and without hindrance. This is called the incense of liberation. The incense of liberation. One's own mind has nothing to cling to. Externally there is no clinging, no grasping. Not thinking of good, not thinking of evil, free and without hindrance. This is called the incense of liberation. Earlier, the 5 pure aggregates are discipline, samadhi, wisdom, liberation, knowledge and vision. The Abhidharmakosha specifically discusses this. Fifth, the incense of liberation, knowledge and vision. One's own mind no longer clings to good and evil. One should not sink into emptiness or cling to stillness. One must study extensively, learn broadly, and recognize one's original mind. The mind has no clinging to good or evil. One should not sink into emptiness or cling to stillness. One should not fall into the extreme of emptiness or quiescence. One must study extensively and learn broadly, recognizing one's own original mind. Penetrate all Buddhist principles, harmonize with the light and engage with beings. No self, no others directly to Bodhi. The true nature does not change. This is called the incense of liberation, knowledge and vision. Penetrate the principles of all Buddha Dharma. Harmonize with the light and engage with beings. We could say this means one does not like to show off or be contentious with the world. One can live in harmony with everyone, harmonizing with the light and engaging with beings. He alternates between using a worldly term and an ultimate term. No self, no others directly to Bodhi. The true nature does not change. This is called the incense of liberation, knowledge and vision. All right, you can explain it yourselves. Not bad.
Sonandai Tanche Rogaya Tonani Vedana Basi Kirgana Jirano Chukai Chupun Sonen Droa Droa
Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye